Real quick before we start, if you'd like the chance to vote on the next queer trope I unpack, consider supporting me on Patreon, where you can not only gain access to the monthly trope polls starting at just $1, but also to updates, patron-only content, and my eternal gratitude, which is admittedly less cool than the first two things. Alright, that's it, on with the show. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a weird one. Tropes in general refer to recurring motifs or themes in artwork and storytelling that tend to pop up in different forms across the media we create and consume. However, this is one of the very few tropes that refer specifically to the reaction and interpretation of the audience. While you can technically put it in media, such as by having a character responding to an in-universe piece of art, that's pretty much never what this trope refers to, so I won't really be talking about that for this video. Ho-yay, short for homoeroticism, yay! Refers to when viewers or fans of a show delight in interpreting certain moments and interactions between characters, usually facilitated by non-sexual intimacy, as being homoerotic. In essence, ho-yay is when someone looks at something and says, "That's gay as shit and I'm here for it," regardless of whether or not there is anything actually gay or homoerotic or even romantic about it. Oh yeah, and sometimes when the characters in question are both girls, it's referred to as les-gay, but that doesn't roll off the tongue as well, so I won't be using it. While this phenomenon is likely old as dirt, I mean as long as there's been art to interpret, there's been someone to interpret it as being gay, the widespread recognition of it likely stems from back before even the implementation of the Hays Code, when homosexuality in general was a taboo subject. Back then, pretty much any possible gay interpretation was widely accepted to be a crack pairing, because there was absolutely no way creators would risk the wrath of these so-called moral guardians, and the idea that there might actually be depictions of homosexuality were often laughed off. This has actually been one of the largest changes in media over the last few decades. Despite the screaming shitfits thrown by the most rancid straight men and caustic Karens you'll ever see, LGBT characters and themes are pretty widely accepted and enjoyed. So we actually do get gay characters being gay on screen. However, this isn't what I'm referring to when I talk about ho-yay either. It's just important to understand one of the places it stems from. The thing about ho-yay is that it largely exists entirely independent of actual on-screen proof. It's usually purely a product of audience interpretation. Ho-yay is an external factor stemming from the viewer, not an internal or even usually intentional effort on the part of the creator. When it is done intentionally, we call it homoerotic subtext or an implied love interest or ship tease. But those are set apart by the fact that the creator specifically put them in to tease a ho-yay reaction out of the audience. It's not true ho-yay in that case, just a positive reception to representation, implied or otherwise. What's funny is that while most people don't know the name of the trope, everyone with even a passing familiarity with fandom knows the phenomenon well. We all have that one friend who looks at any two characters who so much as make prolonged eye contact and immediately goes,
"Oh, they fucking."
And we all know people who get so rabidly excited about shipping that any and all logic flies out the window, usually followed by any semblance of self-respect or decency, but pro shippers are a topic for an entirely different video. Ho-yay is such a common phenomenon that if I wanted to, I could easily make this a 3-hour long video just listing examples of ho-yay in video games alone. The TV Tropes page for this is a fractal nightmare of links that lead to pages with links to other pages of links, and there's honestly just way too much for anyone to try to comprehensively cover with any amount of sense. Just based on the explanation of the trope I've given so far, any fans of Danganronpa or Fire Emblem or Kingdom Hearts could easily list at least a dozen examples off the top of their head. And it would be a similar case for fans of Avatar or Teen Titans or almost any anime or manga ever created ever. Hell, if you want to go back a little bit further, then look at Star Trek, especially with Kirk and Spock. Or if you want a more recent example, I'm sure most Silksong players are well aware of the number of people who looked at Hornet and Lace and immediately started hardcore shipping them, despite zero romantic implication in any of their actions and their repeated attempts to kill each other. Actually, that second thing is probably a big part of why so many people ship them so hard. And this isn't me shitting on LaceNet shippers, by the way, as much as I hate that ship name. This is just meant to be an example of how little is really required to induce a ho-yay reaction. I'm not speaking against anyone who enjoys ho-yay, it's pretty much just all in good fun. As I said, ho-yay pairings were originally all considered to be crack ships anyway, so it being fun is pretty much baked into the trope's DNA. There's nothing inherently harmful or even bad about ho-yay. Any negativity entirely stems from the toxicity and aggression of the person who had the reaction. What actually struck me as really fucking hilarious though is that I realized while writing this that there's one example of Hou-Ye that basically every single person under the age of 40 knows, and the people have basically used as a shorthand for the Hou-Ye reaction, but without ever having knowledge that it was this trope at all. And it's this.
And they were roommates.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
Think about it. There is absolutely zero context as to what that woman meant. The guy just made it sound funny, and then people collectively agreed that, oh my god, they were roommates was slang for them being gay. And then other people started using it as a meme to express their interpretation of characters as gay for each other. It's multiple layers of Hou-Ye in a single 3-second audio clip, and it's delightful. Now then, usually I talk about whether the topic trope is positive or negative and how to best implement it, but that's kind of hard to do with this one for what I'd hope are obvious reasons, but there are a couple more things I'd like to cover before the video's finished. The first being the ambiguity of the trope as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, Hou-Ye is technically entirely separate from homoerotic subtext, but there is a serious level of overlap between the two because, well, quite frankly, it can just be really fucking hard sometimes to tell which is more to blame for the audience's reaction. My favorite example of this is actually something my roommate brought up while I was explaining the trope to him: Top Gun. Pretty much everyone knows this movie by reputation, and that reputation is incredibly homoerotic, to the point that even the actors have memed on it in the past. But it's not entirely clear how much of that is the movie actually being homoerotic and how much is the viewer's expectation of homoeroticism coloring their interpretation of the movie, if you understand what I mean. Where one ends and the other begins isn't entirely clear, and how much of it is which kind of varies depending on who you ask, which I actually think is really funny. Because this is all about interpretation, the way it's seen varies from person to person. Some people won't see something as gay even if two characters are literally married and professing their undying love for each other, and some people won't believe something isn't gay even if it's a real person telling them to their face. Another thing of note is that sometimes people will claim they're examining something using queer theory to justify their Hou-Ye reading, but, well, they're usually not actually using queer theory, just giving a queer reading and interpretation of something because they feel like they need to justify the fact that they ship the characters for some reason. And honestly, giving a queer reading of something is just one of the easiest things in the world, especially if you're not actually trying to convince anyone or make an actual argument like you would, say, in a video essay, for example. Here, let me give you a demonstration. Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2 represents James's repressed homosexual desires. He's the single most masculine entity in the whole of the game and impossible to truly fight, symbolizing the inherent futility in denying your sexuality. He could easily overpower James if he wanted, but instead of killing James despite having ample opportunity, he instead forces James to accept the truth about himself, both by repeatedly killing Maria, who represents the only woman James ever loved, but also constantly pursuing James with a variety of large phallic weapons, only ceasing in his pursuit when James accepts the truth. James even admits to Mary in the in-water ending that he killed her because he resented her, demonstrating his desire for liberation from the heteronormative institution of marriage and from the person keeping him trapped within. Almost sounded like I believed it for a second there, didn't it? As I said, it's very easy to read anything as queer if you try hard enough, just as it's easy to spin anything as having romantic implications if you're dedicated to your delusions. A lot of the quote-unquote reasoning for Hou-Ye readings is entirely arbitrary, just as it is with any shipping. Again, it's mostly just for fun, but it's still fascinating to see the lengths to which some people will go to justify a ship to themselves and others. And again, this is different from there being actual homoerotic subtext or implication. Sometimes there really is something being implied that straight people miss out on. Not every claim of homosexual undertones in media is Hou-Ye, and examining media through a queer theory lens is a valid field of study, one that can often result in fascinating analysis and interpretation that can seriously expand your worldview and that I definitely recommend reading about. It's just that most viewers aren't doing that, and Hou-Ye largely refers to the average viewer. Finally, I feel it's important to mention that the disparity between what's being stated to be true on screen and the Hou-Ye that's being experienced by the audience can often stem from cultural differences, both in terms of place and time. In some current cultures and in the past, certain levels of physical intimacy were and are considered normal and platonic, while a modern Western audience often interprets them as being far more charged with romance and sexuality. This is true of basically all forms of romantic interpretation, if we're being honest, not just between same-sex couples, and outside of the cultural differences, it also stems from amatonormativity. I've talked about amatonormativity on my channel before, most extensively in my Ace Rep video, link below if you want more details there, but the short of it is that amatonormativity is the cultural expectation that sex and romance are and should be the ultimate end goal for all people, and the desire for these outweighs the need for or importance of any other form of relationship. Again, I don't want to go too into it here, but this way of thinking worms its way into more than people realize. And it creates an attitude where if two characters are close at all, then there must be something more there, no matter how much it doesn't make sense when you actually stop to think about it objectively. This video kind of got away from me, but that was somewhat inevitable with a topic as widespread and interconnected as this one. I promise the next Queer Tropes video will be on something a little more concrete. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.